Hey everyone, I'm Tammy Salenberger, the author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about who they are, the different parts of themselves, and for those who want to connect with their true self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I am so excited today to be with Dr. Daphne Fatter. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And we are talking today about something that I think that so many people are interested in, which is EMDR and IFS. And so Daphne wrote a chapter in the Altogether Us book. And I just have parts that are really excited because you have these amazing charts in this chapter. And I was like, this is going to be so helpful to people that know both models or know a little bit about both models. And so why don't I just calm down some of my parts that are just really excited.
I welcome those parts, Tammy. It's totally okay for them to be here.
Good, thank you. And why don't we start with you telling everybody where you are in the world and what you see if you look out your nearest window, and I'll flip through my book to get the fun charts to talk about.
Okay. I might need to grab my version of the book too, so I have the charts handy. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so as I look out my window, I see a beautiful tree, we are just beginning our fall, which means that it's like, 80s right now. High 90s. So we just moved out of the hundreds here. And I am in Dallas, Texas, on the unceded land of the Wichita, Comanche, Caddo, and Kickapoo people. So want to name that. But yeah, so I'm looking at this beautiful oak tree, and it's green. It's nice and cool, meaning it's like in the 80s maybe here.
So you need a sweater.
Right. So I'm thinking about making like pumpkin bread later. Like it is like fall is on. So
well, I'm in New Hampshire, which everyone probably knows. And I want to say that I'm actually wearing a sweater, and it's also an incredibly beautiful day, but it is probably 77, something like that. It's been so warm and lovely here, but like it's 77 and I'm wearing a sweater.
yeah, I'd be wearing a fleece probably if I was saying
it was 77. You're like, I'm wearing a winter cap.
Right.
If it was 100, I would be like at the beach. I'd have to cancel everything and be like either at the beach or a pool 24/7.
Definitely. Yes.
And I also want to say that I actually haven't transitioned. So we're recording this at the end of September. It won't be released for a while. But it has been so warm and lovely here. I haven't transitioned to fall things. Like I don't have any mums. I have not eaten any pumpkin. I have not gotten a pumpkin latte. I've not done any of the pumpkin things. I'm like, it's still beach season. Like we were at the beach this weekend. So I'm holding on for dear life as long as I can.
That's great. Yeah, totally. That's great.
So one of the things, not that we need to like walk through your chapter because people can do that, but I loved this section where you say when to use. This is why this stood out to me, because I actually had this conversation with someone that I do consultation with. Like I'm their consultation person. I don't know what that's called.
Yeah.
And their consultation person. And I actually asked this question to them yesterday, like, how do you know when, because they do EMDR and IFS. And so I asked them, like, how do you know when to do IFS with certain clients and when to do EMDR, to sort of have them talk about, sort of talk through that decision making that they do. And you actually point that out. Like you have a section of like when to use pure, in quotes, IFS and when to use pure EMDR. And then you have several charts that are just amazing about integrating the IFS steps and the EMDR 8-phase protocol. And then you just walk through it. Just so I was like reading this and I was like, this is brilliant. This is brilliant. That's just what was coming up for me. You just walk through exactly how to do this. And then you even do dialogue, like therapist client dialogue. I just thought it was brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much.
So yeah, I mean, what feels like, and you don't, I mean, obviously don't have to like read all this stuff or read it at all, but just what feels like, why don't we start this? Let me ask a question actually.
Great.
What how would you, if someone knows both of these models and loves both of them, what would you suggest in either how to use pure IF, like when do you, let me ask this, when do you use pure IFS and EMDR, and how do you know?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So for one, I mean, I love both of these models. So I am like loyal to both of them. I feel like I know I was first trained in EMDR. So when I then learned IFS, it was hard for me not to, I think as most people, when they learn IFS, they're coming from other models. And so course, like naturally my learner parts were like trying to fit it into my brain about what I already knew about EMDR, which I think is really natural in learning IFS to kind of fit it into what you already know. So for me, I mean, for one, we can trust both these models as single models, like single approach models. They're both evidence-based, and they're both so transformative, right, in their own way. Sometimes I use the analogy to compare IFS with EMDR is okay. So I give when truly a client can do either one and respond well to either one, which, most clients can respond really well to IFS. EMDR, there is, we do want to check in with those protectors. We want to get to know the client just to make sure that they can tolerate the intensity of EMDR. So we need to get to know their system and their parts, right? Which is why IFS is such a wonderful thing to integrate with EMDR. But one analogy I use with clients when I'm giving them a choice in particular is to really think of it as like, okay, you have a basement with lots of boxes. Okay. IFS is walking down the stairs, turning on the lighting, like probably have it be like mood lighting quality, kind of saying like, all right, how's it feel to look around and see all these boxes? Which box is kind of calling your attention, opening up the boxes sort of at the client's pace, one by one, kind of, and seeing how that feels to the client, right? So it's very experiential. It's very process oriented. It's much more kind of touchy feely, right? In terms of really moving at the client's pace, lots of choices in IFS around what parts to focus on, really respecting all the boxes that are in the basement, right? EMDR is much more, and I say this with lots of love, right? It's coming down to the basement, turning on the fluorescent lights, right? And being like, okay, we're going to focus on this box. This might be the scariest box in the basement. And we're going to open it up and move everything in it and shift it and transform it, as well as highly likely open other boxes in the process, right? Because in EMDR, we're working with a memory network. That translation with IFS language is we're working with a system of parts, right? So very translatable in terms of what's really happening in the brain. But in terms of a client's experience, right? EMDR is using traditional EMDR protocol. We are tapping into a traumatic memory network. We don't know exactly where it's going to go, right? And so that's sort of the visceral experience, I think, of those two models. And I know I've also done my own EMDR as a client. I've also done my own IFS as a client. I love both models. I think how to determine who's a good candidate for EMDR and IFS is really getting to know the client system. Also, what are their treatment goals? I mean, I do think it's obviously we're working in alignment with, as we create that working alliance with clients about what do they really want to focus on. Oftentimes clients that hear about EMDR have trauma, right? And have a trauma experiences or adversity in their life that's invading their life in such a way, right? Parts are trying to get their attention to say, hey, it's time, or hey, you really need to focus on this for healing. And so they come to EMDR really wanting to do trauma processing. So in terms of answering that question, it just depends. It depends on the client. It depends on, are all their parts on board with EMDR? Clinically speaking, from bringing in a pure clinical lens, if a client has more complex trauma, has more than one traumatic experience, integrating the models is wonderful, right? Integrating the two models really it just lends itself for complex trauma. If you have a client that has more of a single incident trauma, or what we call an EMDR, like a big T trauma, something that's transforms their life, changes their life forever, And it's really, giving them perhaps post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, but they have one single incident trauma, that's the time to probably just choose EMDR instead of doing IFS, because EMDR is a phenomenal trauma processing model. I mean, it really does help with changing, how that memory is stored in the brain. So I know that's not a clear-cut answer, but I think it depends. It depends on the client, it depends on their trauma history, it depends on their system, on their treatment goals as well.
Yeah, I love it. I'm hearing that it depends on those boxes down there, right? Like it depends on
does.
those boxes. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you can begin integrating it even as the client comes in and they're like, I want to work on this one awful thing that happened to me. And then you can like recognize that, yeah, there's a part that wants to do that. And then other parts that don't. Sort of let's just walk down to the basement nice and quietly with this nice soft lighting and just begin to notice. I do notice that box. It says, hey, there's this box over here that's driving us all crazy. So you need to work on that. But then there's other boxes too. And so we can start with that feels so honoring to a system and really just begins to teach multiplicity and maybe get some self energy on board. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the easiest sort of ways to begin to integrate IFS, like an IFS informed approach to the 8-phase model is to, at the beginning, right, is to start with IFS, check in with those protector parts, any fears or concerns about focusing on this specific trauma. In an ideal world, befriending the exile, holding the trauma memory, getting their consent that in terms of that witnessing stage, instead of in the IFS witnessing stage, doing it the IFS witnessing way, to actually then transition to EMDR. Okay. So that would be sort of like a super clean cut way, right? And we know that client systems vary in terms of the complexity. And so sometimes it is getting consent of all the parts may or may not identify the exile, because the exile is so ready to witness that it's like, some level of blending may happen. And it's like, okay, as long as we have consent from the system, particularly the protectors, we can proceed, right, with EMDR protocol.
I love that. So if I back you up though, because you knew EMDR first and loved EMDR, and then you started learning about IFS, and I'm assuming fell in love with IFS just because of
totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, how can you not?
I know.
And then and I think this is so true for so many people, including me, that it's like you come in as a therapist or you come in as a clinician or a coach or whatever you do, and you already have been trained, right? You've already been trained in other models. And so you really do have to kind of I don't know that we can ever do it. I mean, maybe people that learn it in grad school, I don't know, like, or I don't know, but I feel like you do have to sort of integrate kind of what I was doing with this new thing that I want to do, and this new thing that's helping me and healing me. And so it sounds like that's kind of that's part of your journey. So is there anything, tell me more about your journey. So we're going to back up. My parts are kind of calmed down that we're super excited about the charts.
Love the charts too.
Love a chart. Love me a chart. Yeah, and I just want to hear more about your journey, and then we can kind of keep talking about this, obviously.
Yeah. So I think, my journey with EMDR started, I actually was very fortunate and then I got trained while I was still in graduate school, my master's program, and then took it with me when I went and got my doctorate and did my postdoc and all the rest of my training and clinical experience. And so I really came into this field with that trauma-informed lens that EMDR brings, and all the neuroscience too, that we now know about the brain and how EMDR is beneficial because what's going on in the brain. So and then when I learned IFS, yes, absolutely I fell in love with IFS. I'm still in love with IFS. I think most clinicians coming to IFS from an EMDR world initially are like, oh my gosh, it's like this huge firecracker pins of insight, right? It's like, oh my gosh, wait, I'm seeing EMDR in a completely new way now, right? And so particularly around the client's protectors, right? Knowing that if we befriend those protectors first, we ask about them, that can prevent backlash, what we call backlash, right? In an IFS world, which is when the client can decompensate or firefighter parts or manager parts come online after an exile, gets triggered. And so I think getting to know the protector parts and also looking at blocking beliefs kind of with the EMDR world, like blocking belief that can show up in phase 4 trauma processing and EMDR, viewing that as a part. I think that historically in the EMDR, at least how it landed in my system when I was trained, granted, I was trained almost 20 years ago in EMDR, but it was sort of viewed as this like pathological, like, oh, we have to get that client back on track, with EMDR. And it's like, okay, if we bring in an IFS lens, it's like, of course, there's going to be protector parts with beliefs or fears. And from the lens of bringing in systems, a systems lens, right? A system of parts that is part of the client's healing journey, is those parts will show up in phase 4 processing. And that's, another way to bring in IFS is to honor those, welcome those parts with blocking beliefs and say, okay, what are their fears or concerns? Doing some IFS interweaves with that to continue the process, but have it really be relational between the client and that part, knowing that, of course, it's a part in the system of parts that the exile is connected to. So from an EMDR lens, they're all in the same memory network, right? And it's part of the process healing journey. So I think in terms of my journey with IFS and EMDR, I've gone through various experiences where it's like when I first learned IFS, I was like such a purist that I was like, oh, it's only IFS. IFS is the way. And I still have parts that are like that. I do have parts still that are purist. But then, coming from the EMDR world, I'm like, also just naturally, as I was doing more EMDR, I could not see clients' parts, right? It's like when you learn IFS, it's like suddenly you're seeing everything in parts language, right? Or the parts world.
Yeah.
So, so the integration, everything I wrote about in the book is from my clinical experience. It's really just my own experience. I know that, welcome all interpretations of how these models can integrate. Because I think one of the things I love about with integrating IFS into the 8 phases is that there's so many choice points, right? And we can really trust remaining, remaining with some level of fidelity to the EMDR phases, but we do have so many choice points. If the client needs that support, we want to, of course, check in with the protectors before we get started with EMDR and get consent of their whole system. But there's so many choice points we can lean into from an IFS lens as needed, kind of throughout the whole protocol, as is listed in the charts. So,
yes,
yeah.
Thank God for these charts. So one of the things that you do talk about in the chapter is the STAR, STARR, self-tapping for attachment, readiness, and repair. So tell me about what this is and means, and even how you came up with it. Super curious about that.
Yes. So I created STAR, self-tapping for attachment, readiness, and repair. So I initially created it because I was working with more complex trauma clients in IFS, doing pure IFS, right? And working with dissociative parts. And sometimes when, you're working with dissociative parts, initially, in particular with IFS, dissociative parts can show up in so many different ways. There can be dizzy parts and foggy parts and checking out parts and parts that can, just really take the person out. And so particularly with a handful of clients with more complex trauma presentations, when we were, initially trying to do self-to-part relationship, some of the dissociative parts can show up so like amorphously, right? And the ways that they blend can be really hard sometimes for clients to identify, like, oh, wait, it's here, or various levels of blending. It can be kind of hard for the client to discern, particularly if they're new to IFS. And so instinctively, I invited the client to do slow self-tapping, which in an EMDR world, and anybody trained in EMDR knows the butterfly hug. And I want to give full acknowledgement and credit to Lucina Artigas. She created the butterfly hug, which is a self-tapping bilateral stimulation technique that she originally developed in the late 1990s for Hurricane Pauline survivors after a hurricane hit Mexico. And it's now used typically for processing, right? For phase 4 processing, but it also can be used using slow tapping for resource development, right? For phase 2 and EMDR. So essentially the mechanics of STAR are the same as the butterfly hug. However, we are using STAR for self to part connection. So for example, like with that particular clients that I initially used it with, and now use it with a variety of clients, it's a multi-sensory option for the target part to receive self energy, right? So typically, as I'm guiding STAR, I'm saying, I'm teaching the client, some self tappings. This is done slowly. It's a form of bilateral stimulation. And as we know from EMDR, bilateral stimulation is just a way to activate both brain hemispheres in a rhythmic fashion. It's natural. We do it all the time when we're walking, when we're running, if we're swimming, if we're jogging, if we're drumming, it's very natural. So we have the client, invite the client to do slow self-tapping and do STAR. And just inviting the client, or inviting the target part to take in the tapping in whatever way it can.
Can you describe what you're doing with your hands right now?
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, sure.
I'm like,
yeah, no.
I wish people could see you.
Myself right now.
I know. I'm like, it's so pretty. Go ahead.
Okay. So, and this is, again, mechanically speaking, this is identical to the butterfly hug. So you're essentially, you're crossing your hands in front of you, right? And you can either link your thumbs or not, but you're basically creating the shape of a butterfly. You're putting that on your chest. And then you're beginning alternate tapping. Okay. You get to decide, the client decides the weight. So like how hard the tap is. Okay. And we're doing it slowly, very slowly. And so when we do STAR, we are inviting the target part to take in the tapping as a message from self, right? Let the part know you're right here with it through the tapping. Invite it to take in, whether it be the rhythm, the sound, more of the vibrational quality, adjust any way it can take that in. And then me as the therapist, I pause and just let the client do that. And in my experience, what I found is for whether it be protector parts or exiles, right? This can be such a helpful way for clients to initiate that connection with self. It's even if we have a little bit of self online, right? A client can, realistically do this, and parts respond, right? Parts, it really invites target parts to receive self energy in a nonverbal way. We're talking about exiles, in particular, I tend to, I think, work with clients just over the course of my career, as we all do, that have really young parts, sometimes pre-verbal parts, in utero parts, baby parts, and inviting those parts, particularly if they've had any history of neglect, right, where they may not be used to knowing how to even receive connection. STAR gives that target part, that exile, lots of different ways, right, that are sensory oriented. It's multisensory, it's nonverbal way for an exile to receive self energy. And then also for protectors, I actually just used STAR this morning with a client where there's, particularly this client, there was an angry protector. It was like the part is barely able to take in self, right? The protector part wants to be heard so much. And so it's like, great, can you let it know you're here? It's like, let's do some self-tapping, send a message through the tapping. So it's really using slow tapping relationally, right, as a way to connect with the target part and begin that attachment repair between self and the target part. Right. So it's really setting that up. And then, you can go back to more pure IFS, right? You can go back to insight work once that self to part connection happens.
Love that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I heard this somewhere, I'm sure I did not make this up on my own, that the idea around dissociative parts are for us to not know them. So it's so hard sort of not to notice them. So that's part of their job, right? The job are numbing, dizzy, tired, dissociative, like all that sort of group of parts that kind of do that for us. Their job is to not be noticed. And so I love this as a way of of noticing and connecting to parts that to that group of parts. Like I think that makes so much sense to me. There's something about that just makes because they take us out of our bodies, right? They take us out of their bodies. And so then I just think that's brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah. And in my clinical experience, it's really about inviting the target part to receive self, right? So it's like we're inviting those target parts to be in receptive mode, knowing that they're not alone. And what I found, just given the multisensory nature of STAR, that parts respond. Typically, if there's blending going on, they will unblend with STAR. And then we can move to befriending, the beginning of the befriending kind of repair process with self and a target part. It's very gentle and clients love it, really. And it's, kind of bringing in, bilateral stimulation from EMDR, and then it's bringing in this intention to restore trust in self leadership, by really saying, hey, I'm here, and inviting the part just to take in self presence, through the slow tapping.
Yeah, beautiful.
So, yeah. So I do that with in IFS. So that can be used in IFS, and then in EMDR, you can also use STAR. So as an optional interweave. So, for example, if a protector part with a blocking belief were to show up, right? It's like, okay, can you on this next set, right? And you can do this with any form of BLS. But if for some reason it's getting stuck, right? We can just slow down the tapping and say, what do you want to say to that part? Or invite the part just to take in your presence, right? We're continuing the process, maybe slowing down the speed with doing the slow tapping, but you're continuing with that self to part connection and bringing that into EMDR. Again, using bilateral stimulation more relationally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think we miss if we don't? I'm just asking this out.
Sure.
What do you think we miss by not doing that? Like if we're just doing pure IFS, what could be missed by not doing that?
Yeah, I think that self to part connection. And again, pure IFS is brilliant. It's wonderful to use on its own and it's effective. For some systems, sometimes it can be hard to tell if the target part is receiving self energy, so this is a way to really encourage that connection and to do it in such a non-threatening way. Again, we're not interviewing the part at this point, where this is the very beginning of self to part connection, right? And it's typically really effective with parts that, like similar to dissociative parts, right, don't want to be seen, or they don't know how to receive, right? They may have not ever had self connection before. So this is just a beginning step to that self to part connection. And because it's nonverbal, because it's multisensory, parts have many ways to take in self's presence kind of through that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm wondering if it would also be good, like when we talk about working with complex trauma, we often hear people say that there's no self, there sort of is, and sometimes it can be a lot of direct, talking to parts and direct access with parts before we can even get any unblending or, and so I'm wondering if for the parts that say there's no self, if this would be a good exercise for those parts.
Absolutely. Yes, it would be good for those parts too. Right. And even in doing direct access, right? Through the direct access process, when if at the end of direct access, the therapist brings the client back online, if there's some level, again, some percentage of self energy there, this can also be, used then as well. It's like, okay, great. Let the part know you're right here. Right. And again, it's typically clients experience it as very non-threatening to do slow tapping. I mean, we're not, because it's nonverbal in particular, it's just very gentle, and we're asking the part to just receive. As we recognize that parts work so hard, particularly our protector parts, right? Work so hard for them to know, like, wait, you mean I'm not alone? Wait, I'm feeling this rhythm. I'm hearing this tapping. What's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a way of feeling like we're right here. Like it's like letting them know, like, I'm right here in a different way. Like, instead of verbally, or even visually, it's using your body, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And I will also say, I mean, even with direct access and sort of transitioning from direct access to insight work, also doing implicit direct access, I mean, it can be used in so many ways. I mean, in terms of even with the therapist, the client for co-regulation, I mean, just even when, say, a client shows up and they're really blended, and it's, say even if they're blended with an exile, for example, it's like, okay, great, let's do some slow tapping. Let's welcome that part that's present. I'm aware, right? The part might have a hard time knowing you're here and that I'm here. We're going to do this together. Let's do some slow tapping, just inviting that part to take in your presence, my presence. We're both here together with this part,
Yeah.
so
like,
it
if
can
you're
be
getting flooded, like like an exhale here is flooded, and and it slows everything down. It slows everything down and helps people be more embodied. Yeah. And probably slows me down, right? As a therapist, it probably slows you down as you're like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm feeling, now that I've done it several times during the podcast already, I'm like, yeah, my system's feeling pretty relaxed. Yes. So, but I typically do it with, I mean, I model it, right? So I'm also, the therapist, if they want, can also do it for their system while their client's doing it and teaching them how to do it. But it's been very well received with my clients.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I love the idea, right? So this attachment readiness and repair, because that's what self to part relationship really is this beautiful repair for our systems. And so it's like the beginning of a meeting, right? It's like we're just meeting, and we're beginning this beautiful reconnection and repair experience together.
Absolutely. Yep, you got it. Absolutely. It really begins that repair process. And with it being, self-tapping for attachment readiness and repair, it's like it helps that target part receive self-energy so it can be more ready to be befriended, and that repair process, to begin.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. So is there anything else you want to say about STAR?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I love it. I use it frequently, and like I said, it's very effective.
What about anything else about ways to integrate EMDR into IFS? Because we kind of talked about how to integrate IFS into EMDR. So what about the other way, like ways to integrate EMDR into IFS?
Absolutely. So really, it's when we're befriending an exile, and when the exile begins that witnessing process, that would be the choice point for therapists that are trained in EMDR to give that exile an option, right? If that exile is holding lots of traumatic memories and it may have a hard time, contracting around not overwhelming the system, for example, it's like EMDR would be a great choice, right? It's like, let this part share anything it needs to. There's nothing too big. We have the container with EMDR to hold it, right? We really do. And so that would be the choice point, is when we get consent of the exile of like, okay, here's the choice point for you. We can continue this. The IFS option would be, we can pause at any time with EMDR too, but it's more, we might be doing more retrieval first before we're witnessing the exile with an exile that may have lots of things to share. Whereas EMDR, it's really more focusing on, the exile in that traumatic scene and what the worst part of it is. So that would be really the choice point, is when we move to witnessing.
Yeah. So then it feels like we're doing EMDR on the exile.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. We're doing EMDR on the exile. That's correct. And on that note, in terms of treatment planning, just bringing in the lens of, IFS, it's yes, when we are doing phase 4 trauma processing and EMDR, it's really working with exiles. Yes, protectors are on that same memory network, but really when we're asking the client in traditional EMDR phase 3, which is the assessment phase, what's the worst part, or what image represents the worst, the first, the most recent, time this happened, right? When we're deciding all that, that's really exile work. We're really hearing from the exile, right? In IFS, we're doing that much more directly, much more explicitly, right? We know that part, the self and exile, befriended, and when the exile begins to witness, then we can say, okay, I'm aware there's a lot you're holding. Want to give you some choices here, right? With how you want to share this. We can leave this scene, go somewhere else. You can tell me what this is like for you. We're going to take our time with this. Or some exiles are like, I'm so ready to get rid of this and move on with this. I just want to be done already. Those types of exiles, like, yeah, let's do MDR, because in terms of timing and it being expedient, in terms of that witnessing process, EMDR is definitely the treatment of choice for that.
Okay, so I feel like I feel like there's a part of me that's being disloyal to IFS by asking this question.
Okay.
Okay, so let's everybody be ready for that. What if we have unburdened, right? We've unburdened an exile, either let's say my own, say I've done an unburdening, and then I come back and the exile is like not unburdened, or there's something else here, or like it didn't work, which I'm putting in quotes. But there's something that feels like it either didn't unburden or it came back, or this is a common question we get, right? Like like all the reasons why an exile didn't unburden, and we kind of have all these sort of IFS answers for why that feels like it didn't happen, or we have to unburden a different part of it or a different piece of it, or it's like a diamond, and we have all these sort of IFS-y reasons why the unburdening didn't work. And so I'm wondering if I feel that way, like, oh yeah, I thought I unburdened this already and now it's back. If doing EMDR, like I'm feeling very uncomfortable asking this question, but doing EMDR makes the unburdening stick.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that can be, I think with EMDR, you're accessing realistically, potentially more parts on the memory network, right? In EMDR, it's going wherever the brain's taking you, wherever you need to go, right? It may be further in the past, and maybe even fears around the future. It kind of attends to all of that. And so if we think of it like a big group of parts on that memory network, EMDR can lend itself for sure, which may help with parts where there's another layer, right? There's another layer that the exile may need to be witnessed or is ready to unburden. It also may have a legacy burden. EMDR can attend to that as well, right? Through lots of different ways. And so, so yes, it could help with an exile that comes back and says, hey, there's more to unburden, or we didn't get it all. For sure. Absolutely. EMDR could help with that. Yeah.
And that the way you describe that, I feel like makes way more sense than me sort of rambling about it. But like, yeah, that there would be lots of parts involved in a traumatic memory, or a memory that this sounds, I'm not to minimize it, but any memory, for any memory that our exile is stuck in, any memory, that it makes sense to me just logically that it's not just going to be one exile, that there's going to be a group of exiles depending on the memory that's stuck in the past in that situation. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think that just makes sense.
Yeah, it's a whole system. It's a whole system of parts. EMDR can attend to that system. It just does it in a different way than IFS, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I love it. What else? We have a few minutes left. What else feels like you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, I think, the piece around treatment planning around, okay, so let's say you unburdened an exile, either in IFS or through phase 4, through the whole protocol with EMDR. Then in treatment planning, bringing in the IFS lens of, okay, integration. Let's go back to those protective parts. They need to be attended to either through IFS or EMDR. And I'll give you an example that would be kind of a better fit for EMDR with integration with the protectors is, for example, if a client has a firefighter part who's suicidal or, binge eats or has, any sort of addiction oriented behavior, and that protector may have lots of shame about how it was trying to help the system or the stigma and how it was trying to help the system. So it's like, okay, after you've attended to the exile that firefighter part was protecting, coming back and offering EMDR for that firefighter, right? What was that like for the firefighter? What was the hardest part of that? When did that firefighter part take on that role? And you can do that through EMDR in such a beautiful way where it just, again, contributes to the reorganization of the system. But with that awareness of the trauma lens that EMDR brings of, right, for particularly firefighter parts that may feel ashamed of what they did to try to help the system, or they may be aware of the impact of the collateral damage that happened when they showed up, EMDR can really help with that. So again, it's just sort of bringing in that IFS lens of, okay, even after you attend to the exile at unburdens, whether that be through IFS or EMDR, then bringing in the protective system again, sort of, bringing that in more holistically.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. Well, I am excited about your chapter and the charts. And the charts. I just think that you make it just so clear. I just think that the way you laid out your chapter just made it so clear with the charts and the dialogue. And I just think that this is a subject that I think a lot of people are interested in and is helpful. And I love the butterfly. I love that.
Yes.
And it does feel good just to do that as you were talking. So the rhythm of that just feels really nice.
Yeah, great. It was so great to see you. And thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to see you too. And where can people find out more about you and all the fun stuff that you do?
Yes. So I'm going to direct them to my website, which is my name, Daphne Fatter, which is FATTER, PhD.com. So I have a lot of offerings right now that I'm really excited about. So you can definitely check me out there.
Perfect. And so I know, Daphne, that you and I met before about your other chapter. And so I'm not sure if this one might be released before that one. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask you the question that I'm sure I asked you in that episode also, but this one might be released first. So let's go ahead and let everybody know, if you weren't doing all the things that you do, what would you do instead?
So I've actually, this is the first time that you and I've done a podcast where I actually thought about this before, this morning, I was like, I have a different answer.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
So a super fun thing that I just recently started doing is being the volleyball coach for my daughter's volleyball team. And it is so fun. I'm discovering little sportsy parts in me that have not been there for 35 years, probably since I was more athletic in my younger years. And so I honestly would love to do a volunteer coaching and supporting youth. I think that would be so fun. And, with supporting their systems in that way, through sports or through athletics and community, I think through team building. I have cheerleader, not literal cheerleader parts because I never was a cheerleader, but parts that are so cheerleader oriented, and I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. So as you know, I want everyone to get along. Let's all feel like we belong.
I love it. Yes.
I've got all those parts. So that's what I would do, is do some sort of parent coaching, volunteer coaching. That would be so fun with my kids in particular.
I love it. You have rediscovered these parts, these lost parts of you. And now hopefully you're going to take them to the state championship.
Right. Totally.
Well, Daphne, thank you so much. It's good to see you, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Tammy. Take care.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, all the things. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or all the places books are available. You can also visit my website, tammysalenberger.com, where you can download a free meditation on getting to know your should parts. You know, there's parts of you who remind you of what you should be doing. They sound a bit critical at times. Yes, we all have them. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter and the One Inside Facebook page. I'm so grateful for Jack Reardon, who created the new music. Jack is a graduate of Derek Scott's IFS Stepping Stone program. Thanks, Jack, for getting me. And to you, thanks for listening.